I was 3 weeks away from writing the bar exam when my in-laws sat me down at the kitchen table and told me they were pulling their financial support. Not because something had gone wrong with my studies, not because money was tight, but because I had declined to attend my sister-in-law's engagement party on the same weekend as my final review course. That was the whole reason. I had a scheduling conflict, I had explained it politely, I had sent a gift and a card and a genuine apology, and somehow that translated into a character assassination that had been building in that household for 3 years and was finally ready to come out at a Sunday dinner over shepherd's pie. My name is Larissa, and I am 31 years old, and I had been in law school for 3 years on a combination of student loans, a part-time job at a legal clinic, and a monthly contribution from my husband's parents that they had offered, not been asked for, when we got married. My husband Garrett had accepted on behalf of both of us before I could say anything, because that's the kind of thing his family did. They offered things and then quietly kept the receipt. My mother-in-law had never particularly liked me. I'm not saying that to be dramatic or self-pitying. I'm saying it because it was simply true, and everyone in that family knew it, including her, and including Garrett, who acknowledged it in private and managed it in public by changing the subject. She had wanted him to marry a woman from their church community in Oakville. I was from Sudbury, I was Catholic by upbringing and lapsed by practice, and I had the particular misfortune of being more educated than her daughter, who had a college diploma in event planning and had recently become engaged to a man who sold commercial real estate, and laughed too loudly at everything. The daughter's name was Sable. She was 27. She was her mother's favorite in the uncomplicated and total way that some parents choose a favorite without ever examining what that choice does to everyone else in the room. Everything Sable wanted, Sable received. Every event Sable attended became the event that mattered. And when Sable got engaged in October and set her party for the last Saturday of November, which happened to be the same weekend as a mandatory LSAT review session, that my law school had scheduled months in advance for students writing in December, my mother-in-law did not see a scheduling conflict. She saw a choice. She told Garrett I had chosen my career over family. She told her sister that I had always been cold. She told Sable, apparently, that I didn't think her engagement was worth showing up for, which was so far from what had happened that when Garrett relayed this to me, I had to sit quietly for a moment just to make sure I hadn't misremembered my own life. I had called Sable directly. I had explained. I had said I was genuinely happy for her and genuinely sorry I couldn't be there, and that I would take her to dinner, just the two of us, to celebrate. Sable had said on the phone that she understood. She had sounded fine. She had asked me what my review sessions were like, and I had told her, and she said good luck, and that was that. Except it wasn't that, because 2 weeks later I was sitting at my in-laws' kitchen table on a Sunday, with the shepherd's pie going cold in front of me, while my father-in-law explained in his careful, measured way that they had discussed it and felt that the contribution to my education should be paused until I could demonstrate that I understood what it meant to be part of this family. He said it just like that. Paused. As though it were a minor administrative matter, and not the thing standing between me and the last semester of my law degree. Garrett was sitting beside me. He said nothing. He was looking at his plate. His mother was at the other end of the table, and she was cutting her food with the particular focused attention of someone who has already said everything they needed to say in the conversations that happened before you arrived. I want to describe what I felt in that moment because I think it matters. It wasn't panic, though panic would have been reasonable. It wasn't even anger, though that came later. What I felt was a kind of recognition. The slow, ugly recognition that this had never been a gift. It had always been a lever, and they had just decided it was time to use it. I had watched this dynamic play out for 3 years in smaller ways. The Christmas where Sable's preference for skiing determined that we would spend the holiday at a resort in Blue Mountain, even though Garrett gets motion sick on mountain roads, and I genuinely cannot ski. The Thanksgiving where my mother-in-law had introduced me to a family friend as Garrett's wife, a law student, said with that precise inflection that communicated both the information and her feelings about it. The summer barbecue where my father-in-law had asked me pleasantly whether I really needed a law degree to be happy, or whether I had considered something more flexible, something that would let me be more present for the family. I had smiled at every single one of those moments. I had accommodated. I had kept the peace in the way that women in difficult family situations are quietly expected to keep the peace, and I had told myself it was temporary, That things would settle, that once I was through school and established in my career, the dynamic would shift naturally. Sitting at that table, I understood that it was not going to shift naturally. It was only going to escalate, and the escalations would always find a way to be about something other than what they were actually about. My father-in-law finished speaking. My mother-in-law looked up from her plate. Garrett was still studying the pattern on his fork. I said, "Okay." "Not okay, I'll think about it." "Not okay, can we talk about this?" "Just okay," in the tone of someone who has just made a decision that has nothing to do with the conversation they're currently in. My mother-in-law looked slightly uncertain. I think she had expected more. A protest, maybe, or tears, or the particular performance of gratitude and contrition she had been hoping for. My father-in-law nodded slowly like he thought he had won something. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. I thanked them for the meal. Garrett drove us home and we did not speak in the car. When we got inside, I went to the second bedroom that we used as a home office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I was not thinking about the family drama that had just happened. I was running numbers. Between my student line of credit, my part-time income from the legal clinic, and the small amount I had been quietly setting aside in my own account for the past 2 years. An account Garrett didn't know about, not out of secrecy, but out of the kind of quiet self-preservation that kicks in when you sense, somewhere in your gut, that you might one day need a floor to land on. I had enough. Not comfortably, not easily, but enough to finish the semester without the monthly transfer from his parents. I also, as it turned out, had access to an emergency bursary through my law school for students experiencing unexpected financial disruption. I had read about it in the student handbook 18 months earlier and filed it away in the part of my brain where I kept things I hoped I would never need. I sat there at my desk until past midnight making a spreadsheet. Not because I needed the numbers to tell me what to do. I already knew what I was going to do. But I needed this spreadsheet the way you sometimes need to see a thing laid out clearly before you can fully commit to it. Garrett came to the door at 11:30. He asked if I was coming to bed. I told him I would be a while. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He said he knew the conversation at dinner had been hard. He said his parents meant well. He said maybe after the bar exam we could all sit down and have a bigger conversation about boundaries. I looked at him. I said, "I'm not writing the bar exam with their money anymore." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean, I've figured it out without the transfer." I said I appreciated that he had accepted it on my behalf 3 years ago, and that I understood he had done it with good intentions, but that I was going to contact the student financial office tomorrow, and I was going to manage the rest of my degree on my own, and that what happened at that table tonight was not something I was willing to accept the premise of. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He said, "My parents are going to think you're making a statement." I said, "I am making a statement." He went to bed. I stayed at my desk. The next morning I sent 2 emails. One to the financial office at my law school. One to the legal clinic asking if there was any possibility of picking up additional hours for the next 2 months. Both emails received responses by noon. The bursary application was straightforward. The clinic could use me 3 additional evenings a week. I did not contact my in-laws. I did not ask Garrett to contact his parents on my behalf. I went to my review session that Saturday as planned, and I studied for 6 hours in a room with 30 other people who were also exhausted and also determined and also had things waiting for them on the other side of this exam. Garrett and I had several difficult conversations over the following 2 weeks. They were not shouting conversations. They were the worst kind, the quiet, grinding kind, where 2 people are trying to figure out whether they're building towards something or away from it. He kept returning to the idea that I was being rigid, that family required compromise, that his parents were from a different generation and had different expectations, and that I needed to factor that in. I kept returning to the fact that my education had been weaponized, that the message at that dinner table had been, "Your future belongs to us, and we will use it when we need to." That no amount of generational context made that okay. He wasn't ready to fully agree with me. I wasn't sure he would ever be. That was its own kind of information. 10 days after the dinner, I was at the clinic finishing a file when my phone lit up with a text from Sable. It was short. It said, "Please tell me you didn't send anything to Warren." Warren was her fiancé. I stared at the message for a full minute. I had not sent anything to Warren. I had not contacted Warren, had never spoken to Warren about anything other than hockey scores at a family event the previous spring. Whatever Sable believed I had done, it existed entirely inside her own imagination. Or inside someone else's. I texted back, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I haven't contacted Warren about anything. The three dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then she called me. She was whispering, which told me she was somewhere she couldn't speak freely. She said she had found something on her mother's phone. She had been looking for a photo from the engagement party, and she had found a text thread with one of Warren's cousins, someone she identified as a woman named Larissa, who had never particularly liked Warren's choice of Sable either. What she found in that thread was a conversation. Her mother and Teresa, exchanging information. Her mother had apparently shared things about Sable, private things. Things about her spending habits and a credit card situation that Sable had never told Warren about. Things her mother had known because Sable had confided in her. Teresa had used that information to raise concerns with Warren's family about whether Sable was financially responsible. Warren's family had brought it to Warren 2 weeks before the engagement party. He had confronted Sable at the party, quietly in a corner, and she had managed it. But the damage was sitting there, under the surface of their engagement, like a fault line. Sable had thought, when she found the thread, that I might have been the one feeding information to Teresa. We had never been close. She knew her mother didn't like me. She had, I think, momentarily assembled the worst version of events and panicked. When I told her I had nothing to do with it, she went very quiet. I said, Sable, look at the thread again. Think about who had access to the information about your credit card. Think about who else your mother talks to. Another long silence. Then she said, oh, and I said, yeah, she cried. Not the composed, managed kind of crying. The real kind, the kind that comes out when something you've been protecting yourself from finally becomes undeniable. She said she didn't understand why. She said her mother had always been on her side. I said, I know. I know you believe that. What I did not say, because she didn't need me to say it, and because it would have been cruel, was that her mother had not been on her side. Her mother had been managing her. The same way she had been managing all of us, gathering information and deploying it, and the only difference was that this time she had deployed it against her own daughter in the service of some private grievance against Warren's family that none of us knew about. Sable called her father that afternoon. I know because Garrett told me, bewildered, that his parents had canceled their evening plans and were both home, and that his father had called him asking if he knew what was going on. Garrett called me. I was making dinner. I said I knew some of what was going on, but that it was Sable's story to tell, and that he should wait for her to reach out. He said, is this related to what happened at dinner? I said, not directly, but probably not unrelated either. He went quiet. My mother-in-law called me that evening. I almost didn't pick up. But I did, because I had already decided that whatever happened next, I was going to face it directly. She sounded different than I had ever heard her. Not apologetic, not yet. That would take a few more days and a conversation between her and Garrett, and probably between her and her own reflection. But the authority was gone. The carefully modulated certainty she carried in every exchange. She sounded like someone who had been caught, which is exactly what she was. She said she needed to explain. I said I was listening. She talked for a long time. Some of what she said was true. Some of it was reconstructed to make herself more sympathetic. I could hear the places where the story shifted. What emerged, in the version I believe, was this. She had never trusted Warren. She had thought Sable was moving too fast. She had made the decision on her own to share information with Teresa in a bid to slow things down. She had told herself she was protecting Sable. She had not told Sable. She had not asked Sable what she wanted. She had simply acted, the way she had always acted, from the position of someone who had decided that her judgment was more reliable than anyone else's. I said I appreciated her telling me. I said I hoped she understood that there was a significant difference between protecting someone and controlling the information around them without their knowledge or consent. I said I thought that distinction mattered. She didn't say anything to that. I said that what had happened at the Sunday dinner table also still mattered to me. That those two things were separate, and I wasn't using one to cancel out the other. She said she had perhaps been too hasty with the decision about the tuition support. I said, I've already arranged to finish my degree without it. Another silence. Longer this time. She said, you have? I said, yes. She said, when? I said, the day after the dinner. She seemed genuinely surprised by this. I think she had expected the financial lever to remain a lever. She had not expected me to simply remove it from the situation. That conversation ended without resolution and without warmth, but also without the particular performance I think she had hoped for, where I was the one asking to repair something. I hung up and sat at my desk for a while. My spreadsheet was still open. On paper, the next 2 months were going to be tight. My clinic evenings were already booked. My review materials were color-coded and scheduled down to the day. I had done everything I could do. The weeks that followed were exactly as hard as I expected them to be, in the practical sense. I was tired in a way that felt structural. I ate too many meals standing at the counter. I slept fewer hours than I should have. But I was also, and I am not sure I have ever told anyone this exactly, I was also fine. Not happy in any uncomplicated sense. But fine in the way that you are fine when you are living inside a life that is entirely your own. When the floor is yours because you built it yourself, and nobody else has a key to the elevator. Garrett and I went to couples counseling. It was his suggestion, which surprised me and also made me think that maybe there was more to hold on to than I had started to fear. We are still going. It is not comfortable and it is not finished. He has said, more than once in those sessions, that he sees now what he should have said at the table that night. I believe him when he says it. I also know that belief is different from certainty, and I am letting myself sit in that space without rushing it. Sable postponed the engagement, not cancelled, postponed. She and Warren are working through it. I don't know all the details and it's not mine to know. She texted me last month, just to say she was doing okay. I texted back. It was the first real exchange we'd had in a long time, and it felt, tentatively, like the beginning of something that might eventually deserve to be called a relationship. My mother-in-law sent me a message in January. It was short. It said she wanted to apologize for the dinner, that she had been wrong to use the tuition as she had, and that she respected what I had done. I have read it many times. I think she means it. I also think that meaning something and having learned from it are two different milestones, and she has only reached the first one, and I am not willing to pretend otherwise. I wrote the bar exam in December. I am waiting for results. But I can tell you that when I sat down in that examination room and opened the booklet and read the first question, I was not thinking about the dinner table or the shepherd's pie or the text thread on my mother-in-law's phone or the many quiet moments over 3 years where I had smiled when I should have said something. I was thinking about contracts. I was thinking about property law and procedural fairness and the specific, beautiful logic of a system where the rules apply regardless of who your in-laws are or whether they think you're good enough. I finished the exam. I walked outside into the December cold. I called my mother in Sudbury, who has never doubted me for a single day of my life. She asked how it went. I said, I think it went well. She said she knew it would. I got in my car and sat there for a moment in the parking lot with the heat running, looking at the street in front of me. A woman walking a dog. A man scraping ice off his windshield. An ordinary Thursday afternoon in a city where I had built, quietly and on my own terms, an ordinary life. My mother-in-law's contribution had been $800 a month for 3 years. I had taken it because Garrett had said yes before I could think, and because at 28 I had been grateful and a little overwhelmed and not yet able to see clearly what accepting it would come to mean. What it had come to mean, in the end, was that they felt they had a vote on my future. And removing that vote, finding out that I could remove it, that I had already quietly prepared to remove it before I even fully knew I was doing it, was the part of this whole thing that I come back to when I need to remember something true about myself. Nobody gave me permission to finish my degree. I just did it. That's the part they can't take back, even if they wanted to. If any of this sounds like your life, if you've been sitting at a table where your future was someone else's negotiating chip, then you already know that the most important thing you'll ever do is quietly figure out the floor, the one that belongs to you. Subscribe to Bold Revenge Tales and hit the bell. I'll be here every week with another one.